Good morning and welcome to Clean Coast Texas's Lunch and Learn event. My name is Christina Lopez and I'm the Coastal Coordinator at the Meadow Center for Water and the Environment at Texas State University, and I'm going to be getting us started this morning. Some housekeeping items to begin. Please remain on mute. This will help us ensure we have some really great audio quality for our event. Please use the chat. I will ask you all to introduce yourselves in the chat in just a minute. We will also be using the chat function for you to ask questions during the Q&A session later. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded and it will be posted for view at a later date. When it comes to your video, you can keep it on or off. It's whatever you prefer. I would like to share what's in store for you all today. So first, we'll start off with some introductions. Like I said, my name is Christina. I'm at the Meadow Center and I help with the Clean Coast Texas program. Also at the Meadow Center and helping run the back end of things is Allie Schlant. If you have any technical issues during the event, please send her a chat directly and she will help you out. We have a wonderful presentation by Dr. Gregory coming up. We will follow that with a Q&A session. So we will ask you to please input your questions at that time. And then we will wrap up the event no later than noon. So at this time, if you would like to introduce yourself in the chat, please state your name, where you're from, what organization you're with, what brought you to the Lunch and Learn today. All right, now I would like to introduce Jason Pinchback from the Texas General Land Office. Jason?
Thank you, Christina. Good morning. My name is Jason Pinchback. I work at the Texas General Land Office in the Coastal Resources Division. I'd like to thank and acknowledge our collaborative members, including our host here, Christina Lopez with Meadow Center and Water and the Environment, with our other collaborators, including Texas Community Watershed Partners, Texas Sea Grant, and our supporting engineering firms. Clean Coast Texas is here to serve coastal communities by providing local governments, developers, and the general public with information and tools to better manage non-point source pollution and stormwater quality. The tools and guidance we provide can help Texas coastal communities implement measures to reduce the impact of development on the environment and protect natural resources that are supporting the thriving Gulf Coast economy. Some of these resources can be found on our website, as well as one of our documents we call our menu of services, but some of those will be highlighting local planning and ordinance development, grant development and management of grants, learning about green infrastructure and low impact development strategies, and many other water quality and water management opportunities that can be employed at the local level. Today, I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Lucas Gregory to our forum today. He currently serves as the Associate Director of Research Physical Sciences for the Texas Water Resources Institute. He joined TWRI in 2006 and focuses his work on understanding the drivers of changing surface water quality and restoring impaired waters. In this role, he develops effective and efficient research projects and provides stakeholder leadership for developing local plans to restore water quality. He has led planning efforts and restoration efforts in 10 watersheds covering parts of 65 counties, resulting in 3 restoration successes to date. Before beginning work at TWRI, Lucas earned his master's degree in water management and hydrologic science from Texas A&M University and his bachelor's degree in agricultural systems management. Lucas earned his doctoral degree in water management and hydrological science from Texas A&M University while working at TWRI. He is currently a member of American Society of Agricultural and Biological Engineers and is Texas A&M's lead delegate to the university's Council on Water Resources. I've had a good fortune of working with Lucas and TWRI for many years. I've learned a lot through all the different programming, as I'm sure many of you have, including voluntarily being tortured for a week-long class that they held there called Applied Environmental Studies that they hosted at College Station, which I understand is no longer available. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Gregory.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate the introduction there. And like Jason said, my name is Lucas Gregory. I'm the Associate Director of the Texas Water Resources Institute here at Texas A&M, and we work to address water resource issues across the state. So just a tiny bit about the Institute. We are the designated Water Resources Institute for the state of Texas as authorized by the Water Resources Research Act. So we've been around for a little while. I think or 1964 is when we were first established. So yeah, it's been a minute. But basically, we're charged with addressing water issues across the state and working with all parties across the state to meet those research needs, help come up with solutions, and basically address the concerns that are out there. So today, I'm going to talk about some of the lessons learned that I've come across and some of the challenges that are still faced with addressing coastal water quality concerns. As you can see from the map there on the screen, it's not just the coast that has water quality issues. Basically, everywhere that has water in the state has water quality issues of some sort. So that map just shows the water quality impairments out there across the state, and all the red lines are not bloodworms. They're actually impaired water bodies out there. So it's literally everywhere. So oftentimes we talk to folks in a watershed about water quality issues, and they're like, "Oh man, why are y'all picking on us?" We show them this map, and we're like, "It's not just y'all; it's everybody. Everybody has water quality issues of some regard." So there are lots of diverse water bodies out there. They're all created differently, all different shapes and sizes, obviously, but the issues are common across many of those cases. So there's a lot of things to talk about, and we could talk all day. So we could kind of get online with Jason's week-long torture if we really wanted to, but I think we got about 30 minutes. So we're going to do the 50,000 foot overview, but I'll have my contact information at the end. So if you have any burning questions, you can get in touch with me later, and we can talk for an extended period of time. But so I'm just going to get started, and before I dive into the water quality issues, I did want to mention the Texas Watershed Planning Program. So this is the program that Jason mentioned participating in. So essentially what this is this is an effort that was developed 17 years ago now, and it's been ongoing to provide training resources to practitioners across the state and beyond on how to develop watershed protection plans to address those water quality concerns out there across the state. So there's a series of 9 different courses that we do, ranging on things from BMP implementation to watershed-based modeling, water quality monitoring, how to engage your stakeholders on social media platforms, how to facilitate stakeholder meeting groups, and then how to develop and implement watershed protection plans. So the capstone course is what we call our watershed planning short course, and short is it's one of those nebulous terms. So this is it covers 3 full days. So it starts on a Monday at noon and ends on Thursday at noon. So it's not necessarily short, but for context, the original version of this that EPA did back in the, I guess, the early 2000s was 2 weeks long. So it's short compared to that. But basically, it's a crash course on how to develop a watershed protection plan, or watershed-based plan, as they're called in other parts of the state. I'm sorry, of the U.S. And it's really a deep dive into what EPA expects to see in these watershed plans, and kind of we provide some guidance on how to go about doing that. There's no one right way to develop a watershed plan or anything like that. So it's very much something that you can create and make your own along the way, but we kind of provide that guidance through that course. And we actually have the next version of that short course coming up in August. So it's August 21st through 24th in Bandera. And Allie is going to post the registration link in the chat if anyone is interested. We've got 2 or 3 spots left. So if you are interested, definitely let me know pretty pronto so we can reserve a spot for you. And we are going to close registration here at the end of July. So one other thing, or 2 other things to mention about this watershed planning program is that we do host semi-annual watershed coordinator roundtable meetings, and we bounce these around the state. And basically it's an opportunity for watershed planners to basically get together and talk with each other about what's going on in their watersheds, and basically kick around ideas and things like that. We always try to have topical or topically relevant presentations for the group, and we have started integrating field tours in there as well. So the next of these watershed coordinator roundtables is going to be October 10th in Houston. It's going to be hosted at the Houston Galveston Area Council offices, and we are working on a afternoon tour the day before at the Exploration Green, kind of on the southeast side of town, to look at the big stormwater infrastructure that was put in there. So and lastly is the listserv for this program. So if you're interested in this type of content, scan that QR code and sign up, and you'll get emails pushed out periodically about all of the upcoming trainings and roundtables and things of that nature. So, okay, on to the lessons learned. So just for context, Texas it's huge. We all know it. It's also really hot. So there's no surprise there. But we're very blessed with a great amount of water resources. As you saw on the map on the home screen or the initial slide, a lot of those resources are not necessarily where they should be compared to the state's water quality standards. So just looking at it from the surface out there across the state, there's 910 total water body impairments or assessment unit impairments. And the assessment units are basically a subdivision of a water body that TCQ defines and looks at from a management perspective and also from a quality perspective. So 910 of those assessment units are impaired out there. So there's a lot of water bodies that need some attention and could stand to have better water quality. Bacteria remains as the #1 impairment out there across the state. Those numbers have declined in recent years through a lot of these watershed planning efforts and management activity that's been put on the ground, but also through additional monitoring and proving out that some of these water bodies just maybe weren't impaired in the first place. But there's also a lot of other issues such as dissolved oxygen, organics in fish tissue, dissolved solids issues, and pH as well. So it's a diverse suite of impairments that are out there. And you might notice that nutrients are not on the list, and that's because the state doesn't currently have surface water quality standards for flowing water bodies. There's a few exceptions out there, but there have not been developed yet. TCQ is in the process of developing those. So once that rolls around, bacteria may be dethroned as the #1 impairment in the state, but we'll see when that comes along. Moving across the slide to the uses impaired, you can see that aquatic life use is by far the #1 use that's impaired out there. And that's partly because of the different types of impairments that impact aquatic life. So it certainly suffers in a lot of cases. Beach use is impaired in a few instances, and then fish consumption is up there kind of neck and neck with recreation. So bacteria is the primary driver in those recreation impairments rather, and organics is the big one for fish consumption. And then on the coast, obviously there's a smaller subset of water bodies on the coast that you have, but there's a fair number of bays and streams and things and beaches that are actually impaired. So there's a fair number of issues to deal with, and they kind of present a slightly different set of circumstances and a slightly different set of maybe drivers of these issues when it comes to planning. So just a little bit of kind of preface on watershed plans, and forgive me for not knowing everyone's extent of knowledge. So if this is very elementary for you, just hang tight for a minute and we'll get into the nuts and bolts. But I wanted to just kind of set the stage for maybe folks that aren't as up to speed on watershed planning. But watershed plans they're really a tool that was developed, I guess, planning has been around for forever and a day, but EPA developed guidance for watershed-based planning back in the early 90s and it's basically been around since then and is used as a tool to address water quality issues from a more holistic perspective. So TMDLs are the other big tool in the toolbox, but TMDLs, or total maximum daily loads, are built to address a specific pollutant of concern, and that pollutant of concern only. Watershed plans are different. They take a holistic process and basically look at things from the watershed scale. So we all know that watersheds are basically like a bathtub. You can't just clean the drain and expect to have a perfectly good water quality in that bathtub if you don't take care of the rest of the tub itself. So watershed plans are kind of like that, where they tend to look at things across the watershed, try to evaluate all of the drivers that are impacting water quality and work towards addressing those. So obviously the watershed plans are geographically defined by those hydrological boundaries, not political boundaries or anything of that nature. Hydrology drives this. So that creates some inherent complexities. I mean, obviously, dealing with multiple political jurisdictions and various entities and things like that certainly presents its set of challenges, but it's difficult to manage water quality if you can't look at it from a hydrological perspective and address all of the drivers that are influencing it. So one other aspect of watershed plans is that they allow for a mechanism to basically integrate other plans. So it's very advisable to see what has been done out there before you really dive into a watershed planning process. So see if there are TMDLs that exist or other water quality reports or assessments or things like that, and basically pull bits and pieces of information from those other documents and integrate those into the plan. Just like they always say, it's no sense in reinventing the wheel. So if something good has already been done, definitely integrate that in there. These plans are also very collaborative. And as mentioned, they encompass a lot of different jurisdictions, a lot of different areas, and things like that. So there's plenty of opportunities to collaborate. Sometimes that can get a little dicey in a few cases. I know one of my early watershed planning efforts out in West Texas was more on the dicey side. It was one where you kind of had two factions of stakeholders, and if you were talking to one, the other one didn't like you. So it's kind of the Hatfields and McCoys type scenario. So that was a fun one to learn, but I did learn a lot. And then the last point to make about these watershed plans is that they're iterative and adaptive. So everybody in the watershed planning world acknowledges that we're not going to get it right the first time. And then also things change. I mean, you drive around the state at all, and you're going to notice massive amounts of development, massive amounts of change anywhere and everywhere that you go. So what works good today in a watershed plan may be totally moot 5 years from now because of some development changes. And even though you try to take into consideration as much of the development plans as possible, you're still hard pressed to get them all addressed and incorporated in there. And even if you do, things still change. So EPA allows us to go back to the drawing board, kind of reevaluate things, make some adjustments, add to the plan or add more of something that was really effective. And then if something turns out to be a bust, then they allow you to take it out. So it's really a good mechanism to allow for that change to take place over time. But really, the watershed plans, they should really take a look at three key issues. Obviously, one is the environment. That's really what got you there in the first place, is that water quality, pollution that's going on in your watershed. But you also have to think about it from an economics perspective and a societal perspective. So you can have the best solution in the world, but if nobody can afford it, then is it really going to be a viable solution? So you have to think about it from that perspective. And then also you want to make sure it's palatable to society. So is it something that people are okay with? Is it something that addresses another concern that they have? So taking into consideration all of those factors is part of that whole planning process. So some of the benefits and challenges of watershed plans, and I'll run through these fairly quickly. On the benefit side, you have these plans are voluntary. A lot of times, especially here in Texas, if you show up at somebody's door and say, hey, we're here to fix water quality and you have to do this, people bristle really fast, and it's typically not a warm welcome that you get. But the voluntary aspect of these plans allows people to buy in on their own terms, and oftentimes you get some great participation in that regard, and you kind of break down some of those initial barriers that might be there. So the other benefit is that these plans are developed at the local level. So they're not done by somebody in Austin or somebody in DC that, to quote unquote, knows better. These are grassroots efforts where people at the local level get together, discuss solutions and challenges, and they decide what goes into the plan. So it really fosters a good bit of buy-in. Watershed plans also allow you to address other items aside from that specific water quality impairment. So oftentimes we'll go in to address a bacteria issue in a watershed, and one of the big concerns that people have locally is illegal dumping. And yeah, illegal dumping may contribute to the overall bacteria load in a watershed, but most of the time the stuff that gets dumped is like construction refuse or old tires or appliances or stuff like that that aren't necessarily a source of bacteria. But it's a concern, and trash begets more trash. So it's obviously good to deal with that illegal dumping, but that can be incorporated into the watershed plan. Whereas if you were again doing a TMDL, that would not be a viable thing to include in the TMDL or the I plan. So these watershed planning processes are effective coordination mechanisms. It's a good reason to get people together at the same table to talk about shared values, talk about shared concerns, and really kind of come up with joint solutions that can be mutually beneficial. And then having a plan in place is kind of like a business plan or a roadmap, if you will. And having those plans in place can help you in your pursuit of funding to implement some of the practices that are in there. Challenge-wise, I'm going to put voluntary again at the top of the list. I know it's the top of the list of the benefits, but that voluntary aspect can present challenges because sometimes you may have a known source that really is a big contributor to the overall problem, but if the people that are responsible for that source are not willing to do anything, then you may be just kind of butting your head against the wall. So that voluntary aspect can be a challenge there. Same with coordination. That can be difficult in a lot of cases. It's hard to get people in the same place at the same time to talk about things. So that becomes a challenge in and of itself. And then just improving water quality in general is time consuming and difficult. I mean, I always like to talk to stakeholders in terms of it took water quality a long time to get to where it is, and it's going to take it a long time to get back to where it needs to be. So that's certainly a challenge, especially when you're addressing non-point source pollution. Stakeholder interest can also wane over time. Sometimes these processes can be a little lengthy, and people may have a level of excitement initially, and then just time tends to wear things out. People get tired or they get busy and are pulled in other directions. You can also have competing interests that can become problematic. So you may have multiple different entities or two cities. Perhaps they're a arch rival on the football field and they don't play nice in the boardroom either because of that. So you may have some sort of conflict like that or other competing interests that could cause some issues. And then I'll add the last one, which may seem a little odd, but the primary focus of watershed plans is to address non-point source pollution issues, and that in and of itself can be challenging. I mean, non-point source is scattered all over the watershed, so it's not like you can go to a specific point, implement something, and solve the problem. It takes a lot broader efforts, a lot more time, a lot more effort to address those non-point source pollution sources. So it becomes a challenge to get that done and get it done effectively. But on the coast, you have some good draws. I mean, you have a lot more connection to those coastal water resources than you would say in an inland water body per se. So you have your fishing resources. Obviously, I mean, I know I'd love to fish. Tons of people love to fish, so they have that direct connection to those coastal water bodies. Lots of people also go to the beach. I may not like to fish, but they go to the beach, so they can think about it and visualize it in their mind. You also have unique landscapes down there. These coastal watersheds are flat as a pancake, so they hold a lot of water, which is great from a habitat and a hydrology perspective and a mitigation of storms and things like that. But the flatness also causes problems such as flooding and things like that. So there are more connections to those coastal water resources that people can directly relate to than you might run into in an upland watershed, where people live 20 miles from a creek and they never go swim in it or something like that. So that's a lot harder to connect with. So the coast definitely has some more draw to it, I guess you might say. So I'm going to point to a couple of watersheds that I've worked in over the years, just as examples of just what's been done and kind of some of the successes and some of the lessons that we learned through these two processes. I'm not going to say they're perfect because they could certainly both be improved. But the Arroyo Colorado, so this is down in the lower Rio Grande Valley. It basically is what's called a distributary of the Rio Grande. So basically, whenever the Rio Grande floods, water flows into the Arroyo and out to the bay. But the Arroyo, it's had its fair share of water quality issues over the years. It does have a port on the Arroyo, so that's been dredged into a barge channel on its lower extent. So there's been a lot of industrial activity over the years, and agriculture is big in that part of the world too. So there's been a lot of water quality concerns and impairments. So really back in the early 2000s is when work started taking place to address these water quality issues. So TMDLs were initially developed to address some pesticide issues, and then nutrients and the associated dissolved oxygen or depressed dissolved oxygen started to be addressed as well through a TMDL study. They ended up not pursuing a TMDL or TMDLs for those, just because the needed reductions were staggering, and they basically decided that a watershed plan was a better alternative. So from there, efforts began to develop that watershed plan, and it came to pass in 2007 that the first iteration of the watershed plan was completed. And then I guess 6 years ago now in 2017, an update to that watershed plan was done. So kind of as a 10-year check. So I'll show some highlights from that 10-year check here in a second, just to show what was accomplished. But basically the watershed plan, again, took that holistic watershed approach and really looked at all the things going on out there. So to do that, in the Arroyo, they established a sizable watershed partnership, and it included about 400 members initially. And of course, having a 400-member group decide on a plan and make decisions is a daunting task. You're doing good to get 4 people to agree on something, much less 400. But they wanted to involve everybody in the watershed and make sure that all of the interests that were there were represented. So they had the partnership in its full membership, but for plan development purposes, they whittled it down and created a 25-member steering committee. And then from there, they subdivided into topical working groups with 5 to 7 or 8 members, just kind of depend on the group and the players that were involved. But these work groups included things like ag issues, land use and development, education and outreach, wastewater infrastructure, and things of that nature. And really the focus of the steering committee and the partnership was to kind of set the mission and the vision for the watershed. And then through that planning process, they came up with watershed goals. And these goals were obviously slanted more towards addressing the dissolved oxygen issues, but there were also some bacteria impairments as well. So the goals were reduce the biological oxygen demanding substances, improve general water quality awareness through education and outreach, obviously improve overall water quality, and encourage adoption of BMPs in the ag sector, wastewater sector, and stormwater side of things as well. So it was a big effort, and it's an ongoing effort. The Water Resources Institute actually employs the watershed coordinator and has done so, I think, since 2005. It's a different person than originally, but this Jaime Flores is the coordinator now, and I think he's been down there 13 years. So this slide just shows some of the successes that we had and some of the work that still needs to be done from the watershed plan. So this is the 10-year update. So you can see the top 2 graphics show some improvements in water quality. So E. coli is on a downward trend. Still got a long way to go to meet that water quality standard, which is the red line, but it's at least moving in the right direction. And then dissolved oxygen levels are actually increasing, which is a good thing. So they're following that upward trend and getting generally above that water quality standard. But really some of the biggest implementation successes were, in this case, upgrades to the wastewater treatment facilities down there. So a lot of the facilities were old and antiquated and just not doing their job well anymore. So 8 of the wastewater treatment facilities were upgraded, and they volunteered to lower their permit limits. So basically they put more strict water quality standards on those facilities. 2 new wastewater treatment plants were built, and they were using more modern equipment and had much more ability to treat that water quality to a much more refined level. And then they integrated some polishing wetlands in some cases. And the polishing wetlands have really been a kind of a shining light down there. So not only do you get a water quality benefit, but you also get created bird habitat. So San Benito is one city that's actually implemented some polishing wetlands, and they have I think it's 67 acres of polishing wetlands in place now, and they've turned it into a birding park, and it's about to achieve like a 300 plus species status, and that's like a big thing in the birding world. I'm not a birder, so my apologies to anybody that's a birder and I'm saying things wrong, but they're super excited about that. And they actually had a tour stop during the World Birding Festival out there. So it's turned into a really good kind of a destination. I mean, most people don't get excited about going to a wastewater treatment plant, but it's a huge draw from a birding perspective. And there's been integrated education and outreach signage about not only about the birds that are out there, but about the wetlands, the service that they provide, and the arroyo in itself. So it's a win-win-win type situation there. Ag B&P adoption has been huge across the watershed. So there's still a lot of agriculture down there. There's a lot of development pressure. So a lot of that ag is going away over time. But in that first 10-year window, approximately 130,000 acres had some sort of management practice implemented on them to improve the way those producers were utilizing the land and minimize the environmental impacts. And then education and outreach has been huge down there. There's 15 plus cities down there of size, I guess you might say. So there's tons and tons of people to engage with and bring up to speed. And they use physical watershed models. They've actually made some big models. They're like truck bed size. So they're kind of a pain to move around, but they are a digital representation of the Arroyo, Colorado. And it's really pretty neat to watch, especially kids get out there and see those and talk about where they live and see how their spot on the map is connected all the way out to the Laguna Madre. So it's been really, really insightful. So lots of good has been done down there, but still more needs to be done. So you can see the chlorophyll A graph there in the bottom left, that trend line is going in the wrong direction. So obviously we would like for those numbers to be below that red line, which is the standard, but it's not there yet. So still plenty of work to be done. So that plan was revised in 2017 and that's still being implemented today. Moving up the coast a little bit, we'll switch to Baffin Bay. So this is another watershed that has seen a lot of activity here of late. Excuse me. So just a little bit of history. So Petronila Creek which is one of the tributaries of Baffin Bay. It basically had some TMDLs developed for chlorides and sulfate and things like that back in the early 2000s. And then bacteria came onto the scene as an impairment in 2006 in San Fernando Creek, which is basically the creek that flows through Kingsville down from Alice and into the bay. But the really kind of big kick in the pants for activity in Baffin Bay were the fish kills that have occurred in the mid 2000s into the 2010s. And this obviously really concerned local citizens because Baffin Bay is considered one of the best fishing bays on the Texas coast. And it's fantastic for redfish and trout and black drum are the three main species. But a lot of these fish were dying during these fish kills. So this really spurred local citizens into action, and they basically formed a stakeholder group of concerned citizens and started their own water quality monitoring program. So the Hart Research Institute at A&M Corpus Christi helped facilitate that and provided technical support, financial assistance, and things like that to get it going, and really kind of took the lead. So in 2018, this group said, you know what, we've got some data now. We kind of have a feel for what's going on. Let's start to come up with a plan to actually do some stuff. So again, the Hart Research Institute helped lead that effort. They partnered with the Coastal Bend Bays and Estuary Program and propped up this Baffin Bay stakeholder group to basically find solutions to address these water quality problems. So one of the things that was talked about was a watershed protection plan. So in 2020, they basically worked with myself at the Water Resources Institute to develop a watershed plan for Petronila and San Fernando Creek or creeks. And you might be asking, why didn't we do one for the whole bay? Basically, the other major tributary of the bay had a grand total of 0 water quality data on it. So that's one of the things that the agencies really want to see is good data before you develop a plan. So it didn't make sense to include that at that point, but during a future update to the plan, that can certainly be added in there and maybe expand it to a full Baffin Bay watershed plan. But anyways, this watershed plan focused on the in-stream water quality impairments, which were bacteria, and obviously the local concern is nutrients. So there was some content added in there about nutrients as well. And thankfully, a lot of the practices that are implemented in these watershed plans for bacteria also have a positive impact on nutrient levels as well. So the last big thing that's really happened down there, I guess in 2022, both the watershed plan was accepted by EPA and completed, and the Bringing Baffin Back initiative was launched. So this was basically an effort to really promote Baffin Bay and get a lot of interest built around it. So the HRI and Coastal Bend and Bays Estuary Program applied for this Texan by Nature Conservation Wrangler program and were accepted. So it's really been a good boost to just a general awareness of what's going on down there in the Bay. So basically the point there is that this local initiative has really been the big driver in getting things done. So I'll kind of breeze through this so we can get on to some of the lessons learned. But basically, the approach for Baffin Bay was somewhat similar to the Arroyo, but a little bit different at the same time. This watershed is much more rural than the Arroyo, Colorado watershed. You have cities of Kingsville and Alice, and then some smaller towns and communities scattered, but not the kind of metroplex type setting that you have in the Arroyo there. So stakeholder group was a good bit smaller, still had over 100 people, and that basically formed the basis of the planning group. We worked with stakeholders to basically form 4 topical working groups. So these are ag and habitat, wastewater, science and monitoring, and then urban/stormwater. And basically they focused on those issues. So the recommended management actions to primarily address the bacteria issues were to reduce livestock related bacteria through conservation planning and management on agricultural landscapes, remove feral hogs where possible. They're a pretty sizable issue in that watershed. Repair and replace prioritized failing septic systems. So again, very rural watershed, and there's a lot of old properties out there that are likely to have failing septic systems, and if they're in close proximity to a defined waterway, they can have a pretty big impact on that in-stream water quality. Improve pet waste management through education. So you can see on that right-hand photo there, there's a dog park with the pet waste station in the background and some nice dog droppings there in the foreground. So obviously the resources are there in some cases, but people just still aren't up to speed on using them properly. And that's certainly a need. And then sanitary sewer overflows was a big issue in this part of the world, mainly due to the coastal flooding that does occur. I know especially Kingsville has been hit hard in recent years, as have other communities down there. So that's a big issue of concern. And then the illegal dumping. Again, like you can see from the photo there, and this is from Baffin Bay, that it's mostly construction refuse, which doesn't necessarily contribute bacteria, but it does cause those issues. So those are the approaches there. So switching gears, just some of the lessons learned from over the years, and this is not exclusive to coastal waters, but certainly relevant to coastal waters, is during the development phase, you really need to focus on the people, because these plans are locally led and should be developed by the local stakeholders. They may not do the writing, but they need to provide the content. So really you need to take the time to get to know stakeholders, listen to their concerns, what they're interested in, and what they want to do with their properties. And then find out why they care. I mean, that oftentimes is kind of the hook to get them to stay engaged and find out what they want to do to make things better. So basically you just need to ask them questions and listen, let them talk. And then as you get a feel for the stakeholders, find common ground between stakeholders. Even if they're from opposing sides of the fence or what have you on a certain issue, there's oftentimes some commonalities between what they're talking about, and you can really make some headway on some of those hurdles that you might run into. So another option or suggestion is to look to other watershed plans. So said, all watersheds are created different. They have their own issues, but there's a lot of similarities out there as well. So definitely take some time and peruse those existing plans from similar type settings. And you can look for management recommendations from those, look at the assessments that they use to come up with their plans. And basically you can take ideas from those plans to your stakeholders, have them review them and decide what to include. But remember, there's no one right way to develop a plan. So definitely look for others. And then one other thing is to be sure and address all the stressors in a watershed. I know watershed plans are focused on non-point source pollution, but you definitely need to look at the point source dischargers as well. Oftentimes, a lot of those dischargers are doing a really good job, and I mean they're going to have some issues here and there due to flooding and things like that that maybe can't be avoided. But there may be some people that are struggling or some entities that are struggling, and they really need to be addressed, to be brutally honest, because those point source dischargers discharge directly into a water body 24/7, and they're constantly contributing, whether it be bacteria or nutrients or those BOD demanding substances. So working to address those is critical. And then the last thing is to really consider the impacts of climate change. I mean, the storms that we're getting are more intense and maybe more frequent. So thinking about how you can build some resilience into these systems that are being proposed is definitely a good idea. And right now there's a lot of funding that can be acquired to address those or I guess fund those resilient type systems. So it's definitely an opportunity to key in on. From the implementation side of things, maintaining a local presence is super important. There really needs to be somebody locally, a watershed coordinator or some other title that's there either in the watershed or really darn close, so they can be out and about in that watershed, engage with the stakeholders and the decision makers, and not only make those contacts but maintain them over time. And then they're also able to easily promote the watershed plan and those activities and keep things moving. And cultivating and maintaining those relationships can't be overstated because, again, these are voluntary plans. It's up to the stakeholders to actually implement them. So you got to keep that momentum going. So again, meet with those stakeholders routinely, buy them a cup of coffee, sit down and talk, and things like that. You also need to make sure that you're routinely meeting the new decision makers that are out there. So especially elected officials, they come and they go, and you may have a really good rapport with the county commissioner, and then they get voted out of office and the new one needs to be brought up to speed on this. So it takes time, and it can be frustrating because just about the time you get one trained up in there, then they leave. So that can be a struggle, but it's important. So you gotta keep that engagement going. And then lastly is to diversify your implementation activities. So don't put all your eggs in one basket. Look for multiple opportunities, both project-wise and funding-wise, and partner-wise to get that implementation on the ground. And you really want to try to stagger your funding sources to the extent possible. I know you don't necessarily have control over that, but you don't want to have 4 grants start on the same day and then end on the same day, because what if the next 4 grants don't come in or something like that? So getting down to the last slide here. So just some of the challenges and successes and opportunities that I see for coastal water bodies in general is, again, so the challenges are keep that momentum going. That's tough in a lot of cases. Just because of time and people get busy and it takes a while to fix the issues in these cases. So keeping that momentum going can be difficult, but I think on the coast it's a little bit easier because of that personal connection that most people have with those coastal water resources. And then I just talked about funding, but maintaining that funding consistency is certainly a challenge. And this is true for all watersheds, not just the coast, because grant dollars are a big source of funding to operate these. But with the coast, you have other opportunities because there's a lot of businesses or industry in those regions that may have some environmental sustainability goals or something like that, and may be willing to fund some implementation activities in some regard. So you got some other options. Just some of the successes is that local interest. The coast, again, is unique in the fact that a lot of people know it, they love it, and they want to take care of it. And then last on that success slide is to start small. Don't try to solve the watershed's problems all in one fell swoop. Look for those easy win type activities, and look for opportunities to partner with others, like doing a creek cleanup or a beach cleanup or something like that. Just those little engagement opportunities certainly add up, and they certainly give you the option to leverage some of those other existing opportunities. And then lastly, again, the coast, it's unique. There's so many opportunities down there from funding resources. I know a lot of the grant programs that are out there are only available to the coastal zone areas. So that's a different bucket that those inland watersheds can't tap into. So that's good. And then again, the industrial and commercial partners that are commonly present in those coastal watersheds are a big potential source as well. Then you also have the ability to do some more unique fundraising. So fishing tournaments, things like boat raffles and things like that, they get a lot more traction in a spot where fishermen are already coming and engaging in those opportunities. So definitely capitalize on those potentials and really focus on that going forward. So with that, I'll be quiet and put up my contact information for any follow-up questions, and I think we're ready for Q&A.
Thank you, Lucas, for a wonderful presentation. Learned a lot in that, and also just wanted to for anybody interested in that watershed planning short course, certainly recommend that. It's a great resource, as well as the other courses that TWRI offers. Just as a reminder, please feel free to submit your questions or comments in the chat, and we will address those. I wanted to maybe break the ice with you here and ask a question specific to your Baffin project. And I was really curious and interested about the results of your characterization component. And, you know, we all go in with your thoughts and considerations about what is happening out there, but you know, you use the characterization analysis to actually inform that with facts. And I was wondering if you had any surprises or things that were affirmed through the characterization process you did for that WPP.
I wouldn't say that there were any major surprises, but there were certainly, I guess, some enlightening bits. I mean, obviously, that watershed is largely rural. The combined area is about 1.5 million acres, and a lot of rangeland, a lot of farmland. So the Petronila Creek watershed, I think, is like 78% cropland. So lots of cotton and sorghum and things like that are grown down there. So we knew that it wasn't going to be a huge like ag-based bacteria source in there, just because it's cropland and nobody's grazing cattle or any other livestock on those areas. Obviously, the nutrient concerns for that watershed are pretty large, and rightfully so. I mean, agriculture is a huge contributor. But I think one of maybe the more surprising things that I learned through the whole planning process was that the nutrient sources are not as slanted towards agriculture as it might be perceived. So one of the faculty members at A&M Corpus Christi actually has done some nutrient source tracking work on Baffin Bay, and the data suggests that it's about even contributions from ag and wastewater, human wastewater. So that was a bit surprising, just given the sheer volume of agriculture down there in that watershed. And then I guess for San Fernando, that watershed's largely rangeland. So obviously the contributions to bacteria load from livestock and wildlife were more significant. But the potential pet load in that watershed was a little bit surprising. But with Kingsville being right there smack in the middle of that watershed, it's not too surprising, I guess you might say. So yeah, no real surprises, but it was definitely informative and certainly weighed in on the management recommendations that the stakeholders decided on.
Thank you. Christina, would you like to share some questions and comments with us?
Absolutely. All right, so we do have a question that came in from Sarah. She said, you said all of this was voluntary. Is there not any legislative backup for any of the watershed protection plans? Are these going above and beyond the legal requirements?
So watershed protection plans are basically the best way I've found to explain it to a stakeholder is that they're more like an insurance policy, if you will. So there are no regulatory teeth to a watershed protection plan. TMDLs, on the other hand, do have regulatory requirements and stipulations, but watershed plans themselves do not. And the reason I say it's more like an insurance policy is that in the Pacific Northwest, and I forget the year, it's been probably close to 20 years ago now, maybe longer. Basically, the logging industry did a watershed plan for a specific watershed that they were working in, and were sued by some of the environmental groups out there because they weren't, quote, doing enough to protect water quality. The long story short, case went all the way to U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court sided with the logging company in the state who was involved in the watershed planning process and said, look, they got together, all the experts, talked about local solutions, put their heads together, and came up with the best available plan that they could given the resources. I mean, yeah, if money was no object, you could probably do more, but it's not realistic. So they basically upheld the quality of those watershed plans and said, look, they're doing it. And in that case, I mean, the logging industry was gung ho about implementing all the things that were in that plan because that basically enabled them to continue their business. So maybe a little bit more drive there than we might see in some of these others. But yeah, as they currently are, there are no regulatory teeth to a watershed protection plan. Now, I will say that if a permitted entity decides to amend their permit as a result of the watershed planning process, then their permit itself has some regulatory teeth to it, but that's only with that specific entity. It's not with the watershed as a whole or anything like that. So, so yeah, hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you. I think it did. And I really like the example you shared out of Oregon. All right, next question from Patrick. How often are WPPs updated? By whom? What is the updating process? For example, the plan is to be updated every X years.
So there's no, I guess, required timeline for updating those plans. Think back in the early days, somebody was ambitious and decided they were going to update it every other year, so every 2 years, and they quickly found out that that was way too fast because I mean, by the time you get a plan developed and it's accepted, then it takes a while to get your initial funding to get going to implement this plan. You're doing really good to have any sort of measurable implementation on the ground within 2 years of that plan being accepted in a lot of cases. So that 2-year window is way too fast. Think 10 is more commonly used as kind of the point at which plans are updated, but even some of those, some plans don't stick to that timeline either. So I know in one watershed where I've worked, that's the water quality has improved. That plan has not been updated since it was originally developed. And I think it was accepted in 2008, if I remember correctly. But again, the water quality was improved. It came off the 303D list. So that's the ultimate goal of the plan. So there was no real need to go back and reevaluate that thing. But it's really up to the stakeholders. There's no rule that says they have to be updated every X number of years or anything like that. So it's debatable.
Great, thank you so much. All right, next question comes from Tom. Given the magnitude of the contamination, is there any hope for progress toward a TMDL project for Arroyo Colorado?
Perhaps. I'm not aware of any conversations going on that are moving in that direction. I know the TMDLs that were developed for some of the fun things in water, like the pesticides and organics and things like that, have been done and stuck for as long as they have. But to my knowledge, there's not an effort to readdress those dissolved oxygen issues via a TMDL. I think the success of implementation and the long-term sustainability of the implementation that's been going on is really kind of the factor that's maybe preventing a TMDL from being talked about again. Because despite the fact that the water quality is not fixed and it's all fine and dandy. There's been a lot of improvements down there, especially in the face of all the development that's gone on. So the 3 counties that make up the Lower Rio Grande Valley are some of the fastest growing counties in the state. And every time I go down there, it's phenomenal how much change has occurred just on the landscape. So I think given all those things, that we're actually doing really, really well as far as keeping water quality where it is and improving certain metrics. Is there room for additional improvements? Absolutely. But I think there's always going to be room for improvement in any water body, no matter what the mechanism, whether it be a watershed plan or a TMDL.
Great, thank you so much. Last question from the chat. Who's the contact at Texas A&M Corpus Christi that did the study that showed that agriculture was not such a huge contamination down in Baffin Bay?
So it's David Felix. He is the person that has done the nutrient source tracking. And let me clarify, agriculture is still a big chunk of it, but it wasn't like the smoking gun that everybody thought it was. It was quite surprising to see the distribution of nutrient sources coming into that base system.
And he was actually our last Lunch and Learn speaker too, so you could find that presentation recorded. He goes over those results. I wanted to make sure it was the correct person before I said that.
Yep.
All right, well, that's all the questions from the chat for now.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the opportunity to speak. And like I said earlier, if anybody has any follow-up questions, feel free to email or call. That's my contact info there on the screen.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us. We'll return with the Lunch and Learn series in about 1 month at September 21st. We have more focus on coastal bacteria issues, coastal water quality, non-point source, stormwater quality, and working with local cities. And we really do appreciate you bringing your breadth of knowledge and all the experience. For folks who are interested, you could also visit the TWRI website for more information on their resources. I'd like to thank Christina Lopez and Ali Schlant with Meadow Center for Water and the Environment at Texas State University for hosting us today, as well as the other collaborative members, Texas Sea Grant, Texas Community Watershed Partners, for your work in helping us with our local communities as we work one step at a time in improving water quality and non-point source management in the coast. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks so much, Jason. Thank you to everyone for joining. We sure appreciate it. Hope to see y'all next time. Take care.